Hello and welcome back to the Emagia AI for Finance podcast. This is Brian Shappell, the Emagia Director of Marketing and Content Strategy. We're here today with a real veteran of the credit industry, somebody who's known by pretty much anybody who does the job and goes to events around the country. Diana Crowe. She is the regional director for NACM Southwest. She also does a lot of, public speaking engagement on credit and order to cash type stuff. From her for years of rich experience. Back in 2019, you spent a little time with High Radius. Before that, you spent almost a decade with IAB Solutions. You've been, regional operations manager for them as well in previous years. So you are certainly someone with a lot of expertise in this area. So we're lucky to have you here today. If you want to go ahead and just talk a little bit more about your background and how it pertains to things that are going on right now in finance and business and credit, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. But yeah, to your point, I've been around for quite a while. And just to set the official record straight, I think I started when I was 8. So that explains my years of service. So I, but yeah, I actually spent almost 25 years at IAB in different roles. My last role, I was there over a decade in business development. I have been in credit really my whole career. I spent a brief stint as a legal secretary, which was what my first degree was in. And when I was getting promoted to secretary, I that kind of fell through. So as my consolation prize, they gave me the accounts receivable, and that started a lifelong world into credit and AR. And so I've had the privilege of being around credit professionals essentially my entire career, and it has been a true pleasure. They're just a fantastic group of people in a wonderful and ever-changing industry, which brings us to what we're talking about today with the whole AI and automation and how that's currently impacting the industry and how people are being affected by that. So, and of course, now I serve as regional director for NACM Southwest and have the privilege to continue to get to meet people in all different industries and all different levels of their career. And it's just a fascinating thing, and it keeps me on my toes. And I love getting to hear people's stories and, learning where they're at and what's going on with them. So thank you for having me here today.
Okay. Speaking of hearing people's stories, we could just jump right in and talk a bit about where things have gone with technology, automation, autonomous finance, artificial intelligence. It seemed like when I was back with NACM National almost a decade ago, it was the topic no one wanted to talk about, and it seemed like that kind of continued for a while, maybe up until 2023, when we noticed there was a lot more mainstreaming of it. Perhaps because ChatGPT broke through and people saw, oh, hey, this can actually help me, or they started realizing things like when you reroute it on a map, that's kind of AI at work, or when
Mhm.
you're having Siri play a song you like or order your groceries for you because you're out of bottled water or whatever. That's all part of it. So it seemed like, on our side, whether it's credit professionals, CFOs, treasurers, controllers, et cetera, we started to see more people by 2023 at least being willing to have the conversation. Did you see a similar change in your circles around that time? And if so, how? Like what kind of was the moment where you thought, oh wow, this is more than a couple questions, this is a trend.
I think that people have been willing to accept it more easily, perhaps in their personal lives. For the examples you mentioned, right? I mean, I know I rely heavily on automation and AI and predictive things. I mean, with just my personal shopping, all those kind of things. But I believe that people, especially those that were maybe the smaller or mid-tier type companies, they saw automation probably more as a threat, right, than something that could be helpful, because it could potentially, replace them as the way that they saw it. And so I think it took a long time and a lot of conversations between people who are in that field versus people who are in credit and people who saw the benefits that it could bring. And then, I think that as we accepted technology more readily into our work lives, with the events of 2020 and forward, it became a more readily acceptable thing for technology. And we began to understand that, this could perhaps work to our advantage as opposed to the detriment. And I think it's still a education that's going on. I think it's more widespread acceptance. Even 5+ years ago, when I was talking to people about this directly, the format was, or the reasoning was that, this is going to happen. If you want to stay competitive, you have to embrace automation. And of course, that comes now with, some level of AI, whether it's from Gia, who, is part of Emagia's, or, some of the other companies, the ones that they use, some level of automation you have to have in your business if you want to stay competitive. So it's no longer a matter of if it's going to happen, but when. And so I think that people are starting to understand now that we have to embrace it, and we have to position ourselves as credit professionals to be in a better place to be ready for when that happens, and to ensure that, A, we have job security, right? Because that's always the biggest fear people have with automation, is that it's going to replace me and, what I do. And so learning, more education along the lines of what automation and AI can do to make our lives better, both in our personal and our professional lives, I think is part of the key that's been happening. To your point, it's been going on for quite some time, but it's finally starting to gain some traction. And I think with the evolution of, to your point, Chat GPT, and people seeing how this could be a significant productivity enhancer for me, right? I think that those are things that have factored into the conversation and have made people understanding and better accepting of this as part of their professional lives now.
So you mentioned some of the obstacles that were around in past years, and that people have started to get over, and now people are starting to learn about it a little more. That said, what do you think is still in the way of adoption, or still in the way of getting people to use it? Is it a fear factor? Is it as much as just lack of knowledge and need for education? Is it something else in corporate culture? What do you think needs to be overcome for, business world and the credit world to really take a leap with this, and instead of just having automation and AI make small changes and small
Mhm.
improvements for them, help them make like exponential jumps?
I mean, I think that, interestingly enough, I do a lot of study and research into the whole generations in the workplace, right? And we know that we can have up to 5 generations in the workplace right now. And I think that as more younger generations start to come into the workplace, who are obviously much more accepting of technology and its role in their lives. And I think that the transition, though, between taking the experience that you have from the seasoned credit professionals, and then that accepting of technology from the new and emerging credit professionals, marrying those two together, I think are a critical way. Again, I think there's still the fear factor, right? Someone who's been around credit for 20, 30 years and is like, listen, I've managed it my whole career without having, this kind of help. Why do I need it now? Right. So I think that definitely still plays in, but I also think that people have become more accepting. So I think that also there might be some reticent still on the smaller companies, and maybe even your mid-sized companies, right, who think that this is more of a big term solution. I mean, even when you think of like ERPs, and there are still some ERPs that are known to be more enterprise, right? So like SAP and things like that. Those, I think of those in context of larger corporations. And I think that maybe some of the smaller and mid-tier companies might be wondering, how does automation and how is that going to look for me and my business? And so I think educating about the scalability of it, right? If as companies who are in automation and AI can better educate and help people understand how it can be scalable to them and how it can work for them specifically, what works for a large, company that has billions of sales, how is that going to work for a company that has only 1 million in sales, or even if, a few 100,000 on a startup company, but again, they still need that to some extent to be, competitive. So I think that that's part of the leap that we have to make, is understanding for companies of all sizes, how does it look for them, and what makes it work for them? Because, when you look at some of these things and they think, wow, this is great, but do we need all of that? Right. I mean, so I think that's part of the equation, just from my, talking to people, they don't necessarily maybe think that it's a right fit for them, or that it's too much, right? That they need something smaller. So I think from, companies like Emagia and High Radius and some of those others, showing how, this is a scalable thing, and crossing that bridge, I think, is important. But I think that, again, people have come to the understanding that, listen, this is going to happen with my acceptance or not. So what do I need to do, and how can we help educate people and help them position themselves strategically so that they understand what the role specifically is of automation and AI, versus why we still need their expertise, and how they factor into the whole, big picture now.
Okay, so we talked about some of the obstacles. Now let's talk about some of the winning, some of the benefits. I'm guessing some people that have become early adopters and are sort of blazing the trail, so to speak.
Right.
But what do you think are some of the ways that people in your network most want to apply AI and things like that? And does that match with what maybe people should be doing at the beginning, and what is sort of the most agreeable, or actually achievable type stuff early on, in a walk before you run kind of way? Does all that match up?
There have been a lot of wins, right? I mean, obviously it has come a long way, even since, the early years with automation and some of the order to cash programs. And, they've developed and they've come so far with what they can do. And I think that, those early adopters recognized that, hey, there are a lot of things that I could be doing more strategic, right? Rather than these repetitive tasks, and, going to find backup for deductions, or, even the cash application side of it, that has come so far when it comes to automation. I mean, I just recently watched a demo on cash application, and, just seeing the things that it automatically do that would have taken countless people hours to do, and so those are the things that, because we're all being asked to do more with less. I mean, that is a pressing problem. When we did a survey, several of the NACM affiliates just in the last year or so, the resounding thing was, we are being asked to do so much more with less staff, with less resources, and all of that. And so the only viable solution to that is, if you're not going to be allowed to add staff, and there's only so many hours in the day, and credit professionals are some of the hardest working people that I've ever met. And I mean, it's nothing for me to see emails come through at 10, 11 o'clock at night on weekends. I mean, they're just trying to get it all done. And so accepting that there might be a way that I don't have to do it all, that something else, right, that automation can do a lot of those repetitive, labor intensive tasks, that way I can focus on more strategic and value added things, I believe is, what those early adopters saw, and the benefits that they're having. They've been able to focus more on their team, and being able to develop them and themselves, and so many, again, of those. I keep going back to the word strategic, but that's really, I feel like, what separates a lot of, those things that we have to do before that. If you adopt automation and AI, that removes a lot. It doesn't mean that your knowledge base isn't still critical, right? Because there are still things that you have to look at, and you have to, guide the automation in, and things like that. But, ideally, if you had automation to perform all of those type of tasks, you could truly focus on, everything from those customer relationships to, your broader credit, the word escapes me right now, but, what people want to do with their credit departments, and with their overall credit, practices and things like that. There would be more time for those type of things if more people accept and embrace the automation and AI. And as far as AI goes, I mean, obviously we see the personal applications in our lives, every day, right? It tells me, oh, based on what you did before, we think this is what you might like now. And, as we start to see that continue to grow in the automation side, and I think that people worry. I know, like for me, for Chat GPT, I know that was one of the things you and I had mentioned in our earlier conversations. And I love Chat GPT, but I use it for research. I still write my own emails and my own, everything like that. But that's something I enjoy doing, right? So, but for other people who maybe struggle to put words together, it can certainly be a starting place. But we've seen examples of where you can't rely on it 100%. And I think that's where the balance comes in. We want to rely on automation, AI, those type of things, but it needs that overarching, I still need a human to kind of look and make sure that this makes sense, right? So I think that, we've seen a lot of more companies, obviously, I'm sure you have, being in your position, many more companies adopting it, and the success stories, are tremendous, but just being able to have those extra resources without extra headcount. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't need people, but maybe those people are now going to be in different roles and different areas, of the department, where instead of just applying cash, maybe now they're performing a more customer service type role where they're, coordinating with customers, or, whatever the case may be. It looks different in each company. And I think that's why it's so hard to have just a blanket, approach to it, because every company is different in how they do pretty much everything, really. I mean, the foundation is the same, but how everyone, they approach it is completely different. So, which keeps it interesting, I guess, right?
No, I'm glad to hear that you kind of have the outlook, and that you mentioned it being able to help people, and be like an assistant for people, or as a lot of people out there are saying now, co-pilot is sort of the trendy the trendy word. But it's just, it is also interesting, the horror stories you hear out there, where people are like, oh well, I'm still not convinced it's not going to be used to like replace all these jobs. And then you look at these companies that have tried that and have gone too far, and have let it write the articles, or let it write all this other content and whatnot, and nobody checks it, and then it becomes this massive PR
Right.
problem, because again, it's there to help. It still needs that human intervention. You can't just scrap everything.
Right.
I remember we had Wanda Borges on recently, and she talked about how some attorneys had to actually
Yes.
use ChatGPT to come up with their whole argument for something, and the judge realized it, and it started citing cases that didn't even exist, because sometimes the
Just
internet
wrote its
pulls
own
in weird
law, right?
information that's not accurate, and
Right.
they got into a lot of trouble. Have you heard any horror stories out there where somebody just like tried to let it run free, and didn't really rein it in?
I mean, most of what I've heard have been in context with the legal, that you mentioned. I think that, again, and what happens is, though, every time something like that happens, that sets the progress of people accepting a proper role of automation and AI into their world, back several steps, because they're thinking, oh, see, this is a prime example of why that won't work. And so I think that, in the business world, I really haven't, thankfully, right, knock on wood, heard any true horror stories about AI. I mean, I've seen some examples of where someone who, asked it to write an email or form a policy, and someone who is in credit and looked at that was like, this doesn't make, because again, AI is just pulling, and it's the same, goes back to when computers first started, right? The whole garbage in, garbage out, right? So it can only pull from what is there to pull from. And as we all know, all the information on the internet, it's not all 100% reliable, right? Just because it's there doesn't mean it's true. So, so it pulls this information. And again, so without that overarching human interaction to double check things, so there has to be balance. And I think that's why the critical role of people understanding what I need, how I need to position myself and as an expert, right? And someone who can make sure that the things that are all taking place behind the scenes with automation and with technology all make sense and are coming out right. Because yeah, if you just turn everything over to automation without any of those double checks, then that's just a recipe for future disaster, in my opinion. Right. So
That's not good, not good.
yeah.
So, obviously, I mean, just from talking to you, I mean, everybody, I'm sure, can tell that you've really stayed up on this and stayed with or even ahead of the curve, which is awesome. Um, for you personally, with your uses of AI, what would you say you find to be your favorite or most useful example of AI in your life? One from a business perspective, and maybe one from like a personal perspective. Like, what is sort of one indispensable thing that's like, wow, I really don't want to ever have to go back.
Yeah. Well, from a personal perspective, of course, I mentioned early on my digital assistants. Like there's just too much in my life between everything that I do, between the working for NACM, the public speaking. I also am an author, and just keeping track of my life. I would be at a loss without the help of my digital assistant. I just can't keep it all straight. And so what I love is that if I say to her, remind me of this, and she'll say, okay, when do you want me to remind you? I tell her, and then I love it because she'll say, this seems important. Should I continue to remind you until you tell me you've completed it, right? And so I'm like, oh, she gets me because
Wow, that's great.
So, but the nice thing is, but on the other side too, like I also know that should my internet go down or the power go out, I'm screwed, right? Like I just so again,
there's that's back to paper notebooks and calendars, right?
right, exactly. So I think that like I said, that but that has been just being able to add something to a grocery list so that I don't have to think about it, and then it's on my phone and it's with me. So again, as long as my phone is working properly, I'm all set. So it definitely has made my personal life far easier. As far as professional life, in my day-to-day thing, again, most of it comes to talking to our members about the importance of automation. And a lot of what I've been saying is something that's been a personal goal of mine. When people talk to me about automation, I try to help them, A, put it in perspective, B, find the best solutions that fits their needs, and then helping them position themselves to know where they need, how they need to talk about it, how they need to understand it so that they can be in a good position, as automation comes down the pike. So I think that, as far as in my day-to-day things, we don't really think I have AI necessarily in my work thing. Obviously, automation, I use a lot of things, just in your standard automation type things, not in the context of what, we've talked about for credit professionals with, order to cash and things like that. Obviously, we do things a little bit differently, but I mean, just something as simple as having being able to have a tickler where it's automated. When I put something in, I can put it in for a 3-month reminder. And then on that day, it pops up to tell me, hey, today you need to do this, right? So even things just as simple as that. And then, of course, for, when I'm researching for a presentation that I'm going to speak on, or with my author stuff, I use it a lot, like the Chat GPT and things for research. Again, always verify, right? But since I'm creating works of fiction in the author stuff, it doesn't have to be quite as heavily verified, but still. But again, I think that, again, the clue is finding for each person in each company what level presently works for you, and starting, to your point, somewhere where you're comfortable. So start with, if there's 1 or 2 tasks that you could get automated so that you didn't have to do it every day, what would that look like? And then kind of growing from there. And I think that maybe people don't understand that it is very scalable. I know that, you can add different modules, and so you can start in one place and move the other. And so I think just continually having those conversations is going to be important for all of us to understand, where automation is going, and as such, NACM, we understand that it's part of our role in the credit community to help our members understand that. And so we're excited to, for our All South conference coming up this September 18th to the 20th in New Orleans, we're going to have, some talk about automation. We're going to have automated companies like Emagia represented there who can talk to our members and answer questions and help them understand better, why this is important and how they need to look at it and embrace it and be prepared for it, because it's coming one way or another in one form or another. So, so I think for me, the whole thing in my professional life with automation and AI is just more of continuing to understand it myself so that I can be better prepared to talk to other people about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the All South Conference in New Orleans in September, and I think a number of regionals just coming off of Credit Congress in June in Las Vegas. I obviously walk the halls. I want to know what's going on, what people are thinking about. And I remember the AI sessions were literally out the door with people complaining that there were no chairs left, which is, on the last day of a conference, of a multi-day conference in Las Vegas, it's hard to pack in a crowd. I noticed, not on AI, but I noticed your own speaking engagement was pretty full as well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm always pleasantly relieved when
it seemed like a little bit of a wake-up call that, I thought people were interested in AI when I was coming to the event, and just to see just how interested people were in those sessions, I imagine that conversation is going to carry on very strongly to to all the regional events and smaller meetings and just conversations people are having in general here as we move through the year and into next year. With all this said, and we've talked about a lot of the benefits and even some concerns, where are some directions you would like to see AI go into and sort of evolve to over the next couple of years, from a business and credit perspective specifically, that maybe you haven't seen it go yet? Are there things where you think to yourself, oh man, it would be great if AI and automation or autonomous finance can do blank? What would blank be?
That's probably the one question I don't have the direct answer to there, Ryan. I think that, again, we've come so far. Even to your point, from Credit Congress, seeing all of the advancements in automation and AI and the way that it has progressed over just even the past couple years is wildly impressive. And I think as companies like Emagia and just continue to develop and be forward thinking, they're going to come up with things that we probably, let's be honest, 10 years ago, if you had said, hey, you can have a digital assistant who can make phone calls for you, or even just the whole, because I worked for 24 years in deductions, right? And so seeing in the latest cash application module that, the AI can actually send an email to a company that says, hey, thank you for your payment. We noticed you short paid or took a deduction for this, this, and this. We need the backup, or tell us what this is for. And then when that company responds, it automatically goes in and connects the backup to that deduction, or, identifies why they took it. That just blows my mind, right? I used to have to do that. Was one of my jobs was to call on unknown deductions to find out what they were. So, I think, for me, I would say probably the way for AI to become even more intuitive, especially in the area of deductions, right? Because that's something that's just, it's still wildly, because AI bases it in machine learning, uses what's already there, right, to learn how to handle things going forward. But my biggest concern with deductions has always been, because I worked in it for 24 years, that a lot of times those don't always get worked properly, right? We run out of time. There isn't backup, all those type of things. And so if you say, hey, 98% of the time, this type of deduction from this customer was considered valid. And so it must be that way going forward. Well, maybe it was considered valid because it was written off because we ran out of time, or, we couldn't get backup, or they refused to repay, whatever the case may be. So I think seeing continued growth in that area would be of personal interest to me, right? And I think could serve, especially those who are in consumer products, retail, anyone who deals in those types of issues, highly valuable. But outside of that, I think that, you guys have done some amazing things when it comes to automation and AI. I'm just blown away with the amount of things. And so I really think just, again, that education piece with making sure people understand that, hey, these are the ways that this can make your life easier, and just continue to expound on that. I know that doesn't really specifically answer your question, but that's the best I've got right now. So.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, we've kept you a bit longer than I promised we would, and I know you were always in demand. So we'll cut it off soon here. But I just wanted to give you a chance at some parting shots. If there was anything else you wanted to say on the topic, or if there's something we didn't kind of get to that you want to hit upon.
Yeah, I think, again, I thank you for the opportunity, and I don't know how much of an expert I am, but I love listening to people and hearing their stories. And I know that as a general rule, the credit profession is, a group that they might be slow or to embrace change, but once they do, they're very wholehearted. So I encourage everyone that's out there that's listening, listen, at least check it out, right? Educate yourself, understand, know what it's capable of, what it's not capable of, right? And knowing what it's not capable of is how you can help know where to position yourself to ensure that you have a strong future that moves forward with automation, and it can help your company stay competitive and, be on the leading edge of mitigating risk for your organization.
Thank you so much for taking time out today, and thank all of you at home listening, or in your cars, or during your commutes, wherever you're listening to the Emagia AI for Finance podcast. We certainly appreciate it. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with another great episode, and have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.